a young mother stepped into her first apartment alone, if you could even call it alone. Her daughter, Gypsy, toddled beside her with big, eager eyes that always seemed to be hungry for something just out of reach. The mother was young, scared, freshly separated, but determined. She adored that little girl more fiercely than she'd ever adored anything. They were a duo, trying to build life together. In the early years, Gypsy wasn't the person we know today. She was a child almost like any other, almost. She loved pranks, she loved to swing, she bounded into cheer practice with the excitement of a kid who lived to be seen, and she basked in every spotlight. She could be jealous, especially of her sister, Mia. She could be angry, stubborn, impossible, normal kid stuff. She was a kid that tested boundaries because she trusted that her mother wouldn't leave. But even then, there was something else. A need in Gypsy that didn't quiet after comfort. It grew. A hunger for attention that seemed bottomless. And the mother, young and wanting desperately to make up for the marriage that crumbled, wanted her daughter to feel special. So she leaned in. She signed Gypsy up for pageants, bought dolls, but little by little Gypsy's health complications began to stack up. The falls, low stamina, strange symptoms doctors couldn't quite stitch together. Then came the motorcycle accident, the need for a wheelchair. Another doctor wondered about her muscle tone. Then came the possibilities of surgeries. There were tests, numerous neurological concerns. The mother didn't have the luxury of just shrugging these things off. And she researched, often late, convinced there had to be an answer everyone else was missing. And Gypsy paid attention. She noticed something her mother hoped she never would. When Gypsy acted sicker, people cared more. They asked more questions. They gave more gifts. Her father, though, who rarely visited, would sound more emotional on the phone, more guilty, more hers. And for a child who wanted the world to revolve around her, that feeling was intoxicating. So the next time a doctor asked whether her vision was blurry, she tilted her head and blinked and murmured, "I think it's getting worse." The next time her mother asked if she could hear okay, she hesitated long enough to plant a seed. She didn't tell her mother that some days she didn't need the wheelchair. She didn't correct the doctors when they ordered more tests. Every appointment became an opportunity to nudge the attention dial a little higher. "Sir," she'd say softly to a physician before bending over her chart, "I can't hear very well. Do you think something might be wrong?" And the cycle repeated. Worry, tests, sympathy, gifts. Her mother would panic. Her father would express concern into the receiver, and Gypsy, sweet, small, practiced, accepted it all. Because she learned something powerful very young. When she played the part of a fragile child, she didn't just get attention. She got everything. The years slipped by quietly the way years do when you're surviving instead of living. Somewhere in the background of all that chaos and caretaking, Dee Blanchard began to age long before her time, because of stress. Worry does that to a mind, and when you spend your life chasing diagnoses for a child who always seems one step away from catastrophe, your own health starts to crack. And Gypsy noticed that too. Where most daughters would be concerned, Gypsy calculated. She could feel her mother slipping out of the center of the room, losing energy, attention, the ability to hover over every detail the way she used to. And that meant Gypsy had to push harder to keep the spotlight fixed exactly where she wanted it. It began subtly. A few medications out of place, a few pills in the wrong bottle, small mistakes that her mother brushed off, until they happened again and again. Eventually, the mother had to start marking the bottles. But Gypsy had an explanation ready. "Mom, I can't read the labels. I get confused. I didn't mean to grab yours." Then came the teeth. Teeth that needed drilling, scraping, pulling. And with each surgery came hydrocodone. For a girl like Gypsy, the first dose was like a curtain lifting on a stage she never wanted to leave. The warm flood of it, the soft quiet inside her brain after the nausea. To her, it wasn't medication. It was magic. So after the surgeries ended, the need didn't. And her mother, stretched thin, terrified of missing any real symptom, would call the dentist. She'd beg for another round, another refill, another, just in case. The dentist eventually put his foot down. He'd seen enough addiction to recognize it, even on a girl who could feign frailty. But by then it was too late. Gypsy wasn't just hooked. She was clever enough to hide it. And her mother's own medication cabinet was an opportunity too tempting to ignore. She started to steal, quietly at first, a pill here, pill there. Just enough to stay known, just enough to stay high, just enough to stay sweet and giggly at every event, on every stage, at every convention. Her mother eventually noticed. Of course she did. She wasn't oblivious, just overwhelmed. Then the medicine cabinet was locked, firmly and finally. And to Gypsy, this felt like a betrayal. For a girl who'd spent her entire life bending situations to her will with a soft voice, suddenly facing a boundary was like being slapped across the face. She wasn't just losing access to pills, she was losing access to the version of herself she liked the most. The one who didn't feel jealousy. The one who felt floating, buzzing, invincible. The one who didn't feel rage. The one who didn't feel empty. That lock on the cabinet wasn't a lock to anyone else. To Gypsy, it was a declaration. You can't have everything you want just because you want it. And she never in her life accepted that. So she started to simmer. People with addictions often clutch onto grudges with white-knuckled intensity. They can be vindictive when it's numbing their shame, their jealousy, their fear, their emptiness. For someone like Gypsy, hydrocodone wasn't just a drug. It was a scaffolding holding her entire life together. So when her mother watched that cabinet, it wasn't the loss of a pill, it was the loss of control. A small thread pulled, a hairline cracked in a carefully crafted persona. No echoing through a life where she'd always been told yes. And when a life is built on lies, even the smallest tremor can threaten the entire structure. This wasn't just about pain relief, this was about the fear of unraveling, of the curtain getting pulled back, of every manipulated moment standing there in the cold light of truth. Because beneath all the sweet smiles and soft voices was a much darker truth, Gypsy protected with everything she had. And she was bored out of her mind with a mother who lived by compassion, religion, morality, and charity. A mother who volunteered for the community, prayed for others, gave more than she had. A mother that represented everything Gypsy was not. Gypsy carried a side of herself that wanted darker thrills, the kind her mother's goodness would never allow space for. So those tiny reprimands, no more pills, be careful with the bottles, don't touch things in the store, they weren't little corrections to Gypsy, they were alarms. Warning signs that her mother's blind trust was cracking, that the glue might finally be losing its hold. Because if her mother ever truly stepped back and connected the dots, she'd see all of it. The wheelchair Gypsy didn't actually need, the exaggerated tremors, the whispers about hearing loss, the selective blindness, the staged falls, the conveniently timed panic, the accidental thefts where toys were tucked into her lap, makeup was hidden under blankets, and comic books were tucked into her chair. Her mother's growing doubt became a threat. Her questions became danger. Her mother's awakening was a single thing Gypsy feared more than withdrawal. Because she could lie to doctors. She could manipulate neighbors. She could fool her father. But her mother? Well, if she broke free of the illusion, the entire world Gypsy had built would collapse. And Gypsy wasn't just maintaining lies, she was juggling them. Lies to everybody. Her mother, her doctors, her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn. A man she manipulated differently, with softness and fantasy and promises tailored to his particular vulnerabilities. Everything was spiraling towards exposure. And in Gypsy's mind, there was only way to stop the unraveling. Only one way to freeze everything exactly where she needed it. She needed a plan. A real one, a permanent one. Gypsy wanted to be good. Not because she understood the morality, but because her mother had carved the word into her like a scripture. Her entire life, good was the currency of love, safety, approval, every reward that mattered. And her mother repeated it constantly. You have to be good. Good girls go to heaven. Good people volunteer. Good people donate. Good people care. And Gypsy absorbed that message like a sponge, but unlike her mother, who lived goodness naturally, Gypsy learned to perform it. Dressing up as a princess for charity meant she could be center of attention. Praying in a soft voice meant her mother saw her as pure. Pretending to want a wholesome Christian boyfriend made her seem good. Good stopped being a virtue, it became a costume, a strategy. So one afternoon, Gypsy slipped online and created a profile on a Christian dating site. Under the glow of the screen, she built a new version of herself. Sweet, faithful, innocent, God-fearing, good. And Nicholas appeared like a moth to that light. He was soft in the way Gypsy understood, and he was timid and lonely. He had gentleness and dreams of marriage and babies and purity rings. He was, in her mother's vocabulary, a good boy. But there was another language Gypsy spoke, darker, and she didn't share it with her mother. So she tested Nick at first, lightly, sweetly. Hey, hun, I saw this thing on TV. I'd like to try it. Don't worry, it's from a Disney movie. You be the bad guy. I'll be the good girl. That was the first part of something much deeper. Nick didn't retreat. He was eager, curious, and Gypsy pressed more and more. Each time, she played the wide-eyed, sweet, good girl. It's just role play, sweetheart, just a script, just pretend. And Nick, who'd never been desired like this, believed every word, every scenario, every shift from purity to darkness. But beneath that softness, Gypsy was studying him. She watched how far he'd bend, how quickly he'd obey, and how desperately he clung to these roles she crafted. To him, she was liberation, a person that didn't judge, who coaxed out urges he didn't realize existed. She made him feel powerful for the first time in his life. She gave him a character to step into that made him someone else entirely, and with her he felt free. And to Gypsy, Nick was a tool, a resource. He fed the dark curiosity she'd never been allowed to explore, and he adored her enough to do whatever she asked as long as she fed him the right lines. She shaped him like a director. He believed he was in control, and she let him believe that, because that was the beauty of it. She played the submissive, good girl, while holding all the strings. Two lonely people, two fractured identities, and two fantasies colliding. He felt free with her, and she felt free through him. But underneath it all was still her mother, and her mother was not naive. She was compassionate and generous and faithful, but not blind. And as the months ticked by, she started to see the pattern. Too many inconsistencies, moments when Gypsy was caught moving, standing, balancing too well. So many pills that vanished and stories that didn't line up. She didn't just need proof, she needed that tug in her chest that said something isn't right, and that grew louder. The wheelchair wasn't used as much as Gypsy said it had to be. The elements she described didn't match the way her body behaved. Her emotional collapses felt more rehearsed, timed, and precise. And for the first time, Gypsy felt it. Her mother's eyes weren't filled with unquestioning sympathy anymore. They were beginning to search for answers. And that terrified Gypsy. Because if her mother found the truth, the whole story would collapse. The persona, the attention, the sympathy, the structure, the sweet, innocent mask. Her mother was beginning to see the darker Gypsy. Not the child who sometimes acted out, but a young woman capable of manipulation, cruelty, a performative sickness she'd woven into their lives for years. And the tension started to thicken in the house. Gypsy took all that tension and fed it directly to Nick. She told him her mother was oppressive, controlling, cruel. She was trapped. That her mother hated her. She restricted her and she punished her. That she was a prisoner in her own home. She didn't have the vocabulary to express the real truth. That her mother had kept control of her life. That her mother had made the decisions. That the gentle, be good mantra felt like a chain now, instead of guidance. That she wanted what her sister Mia had. Freedom, dating, real friends, high school experiences, a life outside of a wheelchair she didn't need anymore. So she told Nick that her mother was hurting her, partly because she wanted him to believe it, partly because she didn't know any other way to label the panic she felt when her life started to slip out of her hands. Meanwhile, inside her, something else was shifting. Guilt, shame, the fear she'd always shoved down with pills, attention, affection, toys, praise, and sympathy. All of it started surfacing. The doctors had explanations now, real ones. A microdeletion. A chromosomal issue, a disorder that explains the symptoms without the theatrics she'd leaned on for so many years. And the window was closing. Any new symptom might be questioned. Any new performance would be investigated.